2.0 in Malaysia, Legal Network for Truthful Elections in the Philippines, or LENTE, Cadet and Women Caucus in Timor-Leste, the International Institute for Election and Democracy, or International IDEA, support from USAID through the Asia-Pacific Regional Support Program for Elections and Political Transitions, or USAID Respect. We have prepared a great lineup of speakers this morning, and we are certain that this will be a productive morning for all, where we aim to achieve the following objectives: disseminate the results of LENTE's research on political party finance that looked at political party finance reform and its urgency in the Philippines. Second, identification and analysis of party finance problems in the Philippines. And third, discuss the party finance reform agenda in the Philippines with stakeholders, scholars, journalists, and civil society. We are also streaming live over at Perludem's YouTube channel and also at the Facebook page and YouTube channel of LENTE Philippines. To officially open this conference, we have with us the Chief of Party of Perludem Respect Program. Before assuming the chief post, she was a deputy chief of the same program for almost 3 years. Respect is a 5-year program supported by USAID aimed at supporting efforts for improved election equity and electoral justice in the Asia-Pacific region. Colleagues, let us welcome Ms. Teresia Joyce for the opening remarks. Over to you, Ms. Joyce.
Thank you, Florian. Honorable Attorney Louis Tito Gia, Attorney Aiza Katrina Reyes, Attorney Patricia Miranda, Attorney Prime Bucket, Ms. Carol Ailagan, Florian, friends and colleagues, good morning. On behalf of Respect Program, or the Asia Pacific Regional Support for Elections and Political Transitions Program, I first wish to thank the host of this conference, the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, or LINTE, to invite me to give these opening remarks. I am honored to be part of this event because this conference is a multi-stakeholders forum and enormously important to support the credibility of political party financing system in the Philippines. This event is a milestone, a part of a significant stages of a process have been gone through by LENTE and 4 organizations in Southeast Asia region, as mentioned by Florian. They are Bersih, Perludem, Pradet, and Women Caucus to support the independence and integrity of elections and political processes. With support from Respect Program, LENTE has been accomplished research on political party finance reform in the Philippines, a research that have objective to analyze and review the design of political party finance and electoral campaign finance laws and regulations in the Philippines, to draft policy recommendation to improve political party finance and electoral campaign finance in the Philippines. We will hear further and in more detail about the research this morning. This research, together with 3 other research from Malaysia, Indonesia, and Timor-Leste, and 1 comparative overview of political finance system in 4 Southeast Asia countries, were compiled and published in a book with title The Political Party Finance in Southeast Asia. We will share the website or the link to download the book in the chat box later on. I may also inform here that after this conference, in the next upcoming weeks, there will be 3 other similar conferences conducted by our partners from Indonesia, Timor-Leste, and Malaysia to present and discuss their research on current political party finance system in each country. I'm delighted to invite you to join these conferences as well. I'm expecting that the discussion happened during these all conferences can lead us in the way forward to the adoption of significant standards for the setting up of transparent systems for political party financing. In commemoration the International Day of Democracy, which falls in 15th of September, tomorrow, the International Day of Democracy this year has taken topic on strengthening democratic resilience in the face of future crises. I hope we can contribute through all of these initiatives to support, to create a healthy democracy, to uphold the rule of law, to protect and respect basic principles of accountability, transparency, and integrity. Thank you, and I wish you all have a fruitful webinar today. Florine, I give back the floor to you.
Thank you, Ms. Teresha. So please watch out for, sorry for that. Please watch out for announcements for the next activities also connected with this program. All right, at this point, we will proceed to the highlight of the conference, where we will be hearing presentations from our keynote speaker and 5 resource speakers about political party finance in the Philippines. For our participants, please feel free to use our Q&A box at the bottom of your screens to type in your questions or comments as we move along with the presentations. Your questions will be entertained later during the open forum. All right. Our first in this morning's main agenda is a keynote speech that will serve as our framework input for this conference. Our keynote speaker is former Election Management Body Commissioner at the Commission on Elections, or Comelec. But before joining Comelec, he was also the Executive Director of Lente and the founder of Libertas. To share with us his insights on political party situation in the Philippines, fellow advocates from Asia, please welcome Attorney Louis Tito F. Guia. Attorney Guia, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Florine. My friends from Perludem, Teresia, Joyce, how are you? My colleagues from Lente, from Comelec, and friends who are here. I am honored and privileged to have been invited to give the keynote speech in this conference on political finance reform agenda in the Philippines. I understand that this is a series of conferences on political finance reform agenda in 4 countries in Southeast Asia, namely Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Malaysia, and the Philippines. I have always believed that continuing collaboration amongst electoral civil society organizations and election management bodies in their pursuit for electoral and democratic reforms can only produce fruitful outcomes because of geographical proximity and, of course, our shared political and socio-cultural experiences. I was also happy to learn that the keynote speaker of the earlier conference prior to our session now was Dr. Marcin Walecki. Dr. Walecki was the international political finance expert who came to the Philippines in 2007 and helped civil society organizations here jumpstart a groundbreaking campaign finance monitoring project. I was also lucky to have been a part of those who had attended this training because most of what I learned about political finance, beyond those that are in our electoral laws, I owe from him. Now, I was asked to talk about the situation of political party finance in the Philippines in the past, in the present, and its prospects in the future. My sharing would, of course, be far from being scholarly, as I am not an academic. I am a practitioner, though, with more than 30 years of election experience from my being part of our election management body, the Comelec, my involvement in electoral civil society work long before I joined government, and as an election lawyer who represented electoral candidates. Technically, when we speak of political party financing in its real sense, there is no past, nor is there present in the Philippines. But we can only talk about the future if we work effectively on reforming our politics. Why am I saying this? When by political party, we mean a public institution that aggregates the needs and aspirations of citizens according to the party's ideology, one that articulates citizens' aspiration to make it become the party platform, one that regularly nurtures leaders and nominates candidates for public office in order to carry into effect the party platform, then I can say that we never had such political parties in the past, nor do we have them at the present. What we know and have always considered as political parties are nothing but social clubs of landed elites and urban oligarchs whose ties revolve around how the benefits of political power are distributed and shared. The dominant political parties are hardly ideological. In fact, even their platforms of government will not allow voters to distinguish them from the others. This accounts for the fact that all throughout our political history, shifting of allegiance and party affiliations are common occurrence. This is because political parties by themselves are hardly a factor for political or electoral success. Strong and popular moneyed politicians who happen to be identified with parties and who are able to raise funds to support the campaign of party members are what attracts politicians to affiliate themselves to political parties or with political parties. These politicians can always join another party or form a new one depending on what they see will benefit them. Their supporters will follow them or join another group. In doing this, the supporters can either change parties or remain in their parties but organize a faction that will ally themselves with politicians who can dispense the political largesse. Under our system of government, that politician is the one who occupies the presidency. Under the so-called multi-party system that the 1987 Constitution has allowed to develop, not much has changed. In fact, massive shifting of party affiliations every time there's a new president has reached a comical proportion. Scholars have cited the plurality first past the post system, the one-year term limit of the president, and the strong control of the president of the budget release process as the main reasons for this behavior among politicians. The current setup allows the president to determine who gets to share the goods. Politicians in the bicameral Congress and those in local governments wouldn't want to be left, of course, and would immediately declare their undying support with the newly elected president while he or she is president until the next one gets into office. We have had different dominant political parties in Congress every presidential term. But you see the same people or people from the same family. They just change their political vest, or I would like to call them costume, every 6 years. By now, it might have been obvious. It might not have been that obvious, but I think I had already shared my thoughts on how political parties source their funds under the current setup where the value of political parties do not really go beyond being mere tarpaulin labels. The main driver of funds for political parties are politicians who want to be president and the one who will eventually become the president. There is, however, a recognition that regulating the use of money in politics can only significantly impact the society if it were to be combined with reforming our political party system. In a multi-party conference held in Northern Philippines in Clark, Pampanga in 2002, which was attended by Comelec, the election management body here in the Philippines, NGOs that are that work on election or electoral reforms, which conference I was privileged to be a co-organizer. there was a consensus to come out with a law that would develop and capacitate political parties as functioning public institutions with the aim of making our politics more program-oriented rather than focus on individuals and personalities. Out of said conference came the Political Party Development Bill, first introduced in the Senate and the House, the upper house and the lower house of our Congress or our legislature in 2003. The bill hoped to incentivize political party affiliations over independent candidacies by capacitating political parties to organize their network, to undertake political education and indoctrination, to wage effective campaigns, and to nurture leaders. It, of course, includes provisions for public funding patterned after how majority of democracies in the world have their public funding. It also has a provision that will ensure transparent disclosure mechanisms that allow easier regulation and prevent conflicts of interest, and from identifying donations from prohibited sources. It also allows funds of political parties to be audited by the nation's audit agency. Such bill also, or said bill also prohibits shifting party allegiance within certain periods before or after elections. The idea primarily was that, like in many functioning democracies, reforming our system would require the state to invest on its politics. Unfortunately, however, the bill language in the committees where they have been referred to every congressional session. Nothing have been passed and nothing have came out of it. Lastly, one reason that sets back the development of our political party system is our current electoral system design. We have a presidential plurality first past the post system, essentially. That is why at the proper time, we may want to revisit the design we have under our Constitution and consider one that would more likely nurture a more programmatic politics. One such system is the proportional representation system, which better fits a multi-party system that our Constitution prefers. Or it could be an alternative or any alternative system that will change or mitigate the adverse impact of the current winner-take-all zero-sum plurality first past the post system, which has already been found in many democracies as less representative. Our party list system should have been that PR system, but it did not happen that way. Well, that's another topic for discussion. Thus, when we talk about money in politics from the perspective of regulation, we can only talk about campaign finance issues, as there is not much about political party finance or political finance, which is actually a broader concept. Campaign finance is technically limited to the issues relating to electoral campaign and to individual candidates. Of course, there are a few campaign finance regulations relating to political parties, but these are limited to expenditure caps and disclosure requirements, both of which did not really have that much impact in the way our politics is done. Nevertheless, interest in campaign finance issues have arisen in the last decade and a half, especially when a number of civil society groups started a focused campaign finance reform advocacy, as I have mentioned earlier. The primary focus of their effort was to promote transparency in campaign finance disclosure reports and to increase and develop the regulatory capacity of the Comelec, the election management body, tasked under our Constitution to register political parties. The involvement of media organizations like PCIJ, which Florin is affiliated with, also raised public awareness on the relations between money in politics and good governance, which thus connects campaign finance reform advocacy to anti-corruption work. It was through this initiative, which then involved CSOs, media, and Comelec itself, that a semi-permanent campaign finance office within Comelec was created to have people dedicate their work on campaign finance regulation activities. This was not there before. Notwithstanding the fact that we have had our campaign finance regulation laws since the 1960s. So continuing to raise awareness on the importance of money in politics aspect of election, and for us to continue to work for a more transparent reportorial and disclosure regime, even under the current constitutional and legal framework, can go a long way. We can encourage a more robust disclosure regime to allow cross-referencing of data with those that come from other institutions as part of ensuring accountability in government. But we must always put at the back of our mind the necessity of undertaking a more fundamental political reform to make elections really and truly more meaningful to the citizens, especially those who need government most. If we want real meaningful change in the way we do our politics, we cannot just hope and pray for best behavior from our politicians. We have got to revisit the basic structure that allows what we want to change in our politics. So thank you, and I hope we will have a good morning and learning session today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attorney Gia, for those valuable insights. Indeed, the task is overwhelming. Pushing for political party reforms is obviously not in the priority of our leaders, as seen in what happened in the proposed bill. But it's a task that we must continue in order to have better and transparent systems, better public institutions, better campaign finance, and better leaders. And to inform those actions, to inform the advocacy, we move on to our next speaker, who will provide the highlights of Lente's research on political party finance in the Philippines. We have with us Lente's lead consultant in the organization's political party finance and vulnerable sector work. Prior to Lente, our first resource speaker was one of the main lawyers in the Officer of Commissioner Louis Tito Atquia in Comelec, where she handled the random manual audit for the 2019 Philippine national and local elections. Friends, let us welcome Attorney Aiza Katrina T. Reyes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to discuss our research paper entitled Political Finance in the Philippines. Can you share the presentation? Okay, so this research paper was completed in December of 2020 in partnership with Perludem. Let's go to the next slide. So the objectives of the research was to analyze and review the design, identify problems, and then draft policy recommendations to improve political party finance and electoral campaign finance in the Philippines. Let's go to our presentation flow. So we'll give a brief introduction, and then we'll go to our theory framework, and then we'll go to the meat of the research referring to political party finance. And then we'll do a quick rundown of electoral campaign finance issues in the Philippines. After which, let's go to the next slide. We will be presenting our specific recommendations or policy recommendations to improve political party finance and electoral campaigns. Next slide. So as an introduction, by definition, political parties in the Philippines should ideally be programmatic. In reality, however, parties in the Philippines have not developed as such and may be characterized as loosely structured electoral parties with personalistic or clientelistic charismatic identity. We will be discussing the political party finance or the money which or focuses on money for party functions outside of the elections and is currently not regulated in the Philippines as mentioned by Commissioner Dia. And then we will be discussing electoral campaign finance with two subjects under it, political party campaign finance, which focuses on money obtained and used by political parties to win voter support at the campaign stage. This is currently regulated in conjunction with the individual candidate's campaign finance because of the personalistic political context in the Philippines. Next slide. Just a quick background on theory framework. The first topic under this would be our current political context. It was also mentioned a while ago that the current institutional design of the Philippine government that we have a presidential system with plurality system in single-member districts. So according to the research paper of Mr. Posan and Merkel, a presidential system hinders the development of a stable, well-institutionalized, programmatic, weakly polarized political party system. And then plurality system in single-member districts actually stimulate competition between individuals and non-parties. And then we also found that we have clientelistic and charismatic parties in the Philippines as a dominant party type. It was observed during the interview that of the representative of a major political party in the 2019 Philippine elections, that references were repeatedly made to the party's charismatic leader as the driving force behind the party, and that the party engages in transactional dealings with party supporters. So this observation actually supports the dominant party type finding of Mr. Quatan and Merkel in their research paper. Next slide. Just a brief discussion on the current legal and regulatory aspects in the Philippines. For contributions, we have a definition under the Omnibus Election Code. Similarly, the definition of expenditures may be found in the same law. But for expenditures, we have additional laws such as Republic Act number 7166, which provides for the expenditure limits in the Philippines. And we have Republic Act number 9006 as amended, which provides for the discounts on certain types of election paraphernalia, such as those television advertisements that we see during the campaign period. For the reporting, we have the same law, which mandates that each candidate, RA 7166, which mandates that each candidate and political party treasurer to file with Comelec a statement of contributions and expenditures or SOSE within 30 days after election day. And then for enforcement, the same law provides the penalties for failure to submit SOSE, such as a bar from assuming office for elected officials. We have an administrative fine, and we also have a perpetual disqualification to hold public office. So this was discussed also by Commissioner Dia a while ago. We have developments or current pending bills on these subjects, such as House Bill number 6095, which aims to increase the current expenditure limit, and the important Senate Bills number 12 and 421 on political party strengthening. Next slide. The main topic of the paper would refer to political party finance. Okay, so based on our research, political parties in the Philippines depend mostly on membership fees, but these amounts are insignificant. We summarized and estimated the total amount of financing that the political parties we interview have annually. So the largest estimate that we have is political party 2 with a total amount of 48,250,000. But this is due to the membership fees of elected members or those in public office. But we also have the other end of the spectrum, political party number 4, which would only have an estimated amount of 50,000 pesos of financing annually. Next slide. So during our interview, we also discussed with the representative of political parties as to their expenses and activities. All political parties are engaging in the recruitment of members as their primary activity, but they are facing issues on the recruitment of members because some of the reasons cited is the decrease in popularity of the party figurehead. Okay, so we also have other activities such as political education and advocacy-related activities such as the issuance of party stands on relevant issues in the Philippines. So from these facts, we can conclude that political parties in the Philippines do not achieve the goal of effectively representing their respective constituents. We can see that the membership in Philippine political parties is limited in number, and it is well known in the Philippines, as mentioned a while ago by Commissioner Gia, that party switching of elected officials and candidates is prevalent because of the lack of firm ideological basis and clear party platforms. Furthermore, clientelistic tendencies in supporting the party of the incumbent president exacerbate party switching issues. Next slide. So the question is, how will political parties in the Philippines be able to effectively represent their respective constituents? First, as discussed in the political context, the institutional design of the Philippine government hinders the development of institutionalized programmatic parties. However, a reform of the electoral system from a plurality in single-member districts to proportional representation is a suitable measure to create stable and programmatic parties. That's the first step. Second step, we have to establish a formal institutional context, which refers to official rules that govern political parties. Currently, political parties are required to register and seek accreditation from Comelec. However, although minimal regulation is not necessarily a hindrance to political party development, we can see the Philippine context on political parties shows the need for specific regulation for two purposes. First is to foster internal party democracy, and second is for the provision of state subsidies. Next slide. So when we say that we want to foster internal party democracy, what we want to happen is to implement a minimum set of norms within the organization of political parties to give ordinary members greater influence on issues such as candidate selection, leadership selection, and all that form. So what will happen if we find that political party is internally non-debt, a party ban jurisprudence, which is similar to a cancellation of registration of political parties under Philippine law. And then for state subsidies, we can provide for criteria such as eligibility criteria, allocation criteria, and matching system. Each criteria has its own advantages and disadvantages. Okay, next slide. So how can we establish a formal institutional context? The first method is through the passage of a statute or law. Second is through an issuance of an administrative regulation. So it is therefore essential that proposals like the Senate bills I mentioned a while ago be considered and deliberated upon at the earliest possible opportunity. Without the passage of law, Comelec may preliminarily issue a resolution requiring political parties to submit documents on merit system, nomination and selection of candidates, and party discipline mechanisms of each party. Okay. However, proposals for the passage of law on political party strengthening, however, have been pending for several congresses without result. And then we have observed that recent development shows that there is a decline of political parties in other countries. And should political parties remain in the Philippines remain in their current state, it is a relevant question to consider whether the concept of political parties should remain under Philippine law. Okay, let's go to our next topic on electoral campaign finance. Next slide. We have just a quick run through because of time constraints. The first topic under this would refer to contributions. The first issue we identified on this is that we have currently no limit on contributions. However, we have Republic Act number 11232 or the Revised Corporation Code of the Philippines, which granted domestic corporations the power to give reasonable donations for purposes of partisan political activity. So we see that the legalization of the corporate donations will likely cause a significant increase in electoral campaign finance in the 2022 national and local elections, during which a new president will be elected. If assumed to be true, this will compound the present problem that there is no limit on campaign contributions under Philippine law. Next slide. The second issue we identified for contributions is the incumbents of abuse of state resources. Next slide. We have the current Omnibus election code, which criminalizes abuse of state resources. Despite the prohibition, candidates attempt to circumvent this provision. Okay, and then we go to expenditures. The first topic is the unrealistic expenditure limit, considering the cost of allowable election paraphernalia in the Philippines. So we found here that the present limit of 3 pesos per registered voter in the constituency is unrealistic. Next slide. However, this finding should be considered with the fact that we also found that political parties in the Philippines are not able to utilize the full amount of total expenditure limit allowed to them. So we can see that there is a problem, that the problem which candidates are experiencing with regard to their campaign expenditures is caused by the unrealistic 3 peso expenditure limit, and also that political parties are not able to raise campaign funds to support its nominated candidates. So as we mentioned a while ago, a possible solution would be the provision for public funding or state subsidies for political parties. And for private funding, the expenditure limit may be increased to within a reasonable range. Okay, next slide. We have an issue on a legal loophole resulting to allowance of premature campaigning and pre-campaign expenditure. So for the 2019 national and local elections, this is based on the PCIJ report. 18 senatorial candidates were found to have spent 2.4 billion pesos. So this amount is not added to the total campaign expenditures of candidates for purposes of determining compliance with the expenditure limit. A possible solution would be the corrective legal action that persons who file COCs shall be considered as candidates at the time of the filing thereof, such that they may be held liable for premature campaigning and for purposes of computation of the expenditure limit. Next slide. We have also the issue on unlawful campaign expenditures, such as those engaging in vote buying activities, which is a perennial problem in the Philippines. Under the present law, we have, next slide. Under the present law, we have voters who provide for proof of vote buying activity shall also be liable for a vote selling conspiracy. The possible solution is the amendment of a present law, stating that these voters qualified as state witnesses and shall not be liable for vote selling. And then we go to the third topic, reporting and audit. We found that political parties in the Philippines have weak political party control. We go to the previous slide. So we found during our research that the sources, from the examination of sources with Comelec, various local chapters of national political parties submitted separate sources instead of one consolidated source. And then also we found that the dominant majority national political party in the 2019 election submitted two different sources. Next slide. Our current law would require the submission of sources within 30 days after the election, but for purposes of increasing transparency, we want the sources to be submitted prior to election day so that voters may be informed of the spending of our candidates and that this information may be considered during the election. And then also another issue is that the current election management body has weak auditing capacity because of manpower issues. And then lastly, we have the enforcement. We found that during the research that the bar against elected party members from assuming office is not strictly enforced in the Philippines. Okay, so let's go to our recommendations. Next slide. Recommendations, next slide. Okay, so as mentioned a while ago, just a brief summary, the previous slide, we want to consider a shift from plurality in single-member districts to proportional representation. And then for political party finance, we want the current Senate Bill numbers 12 and 421 to be considered and deliberated upon. Also, in the same law, we can provide for state subsidies or public subsidies to our political parties. Next slide. So for electoral campaign finance, we just, a few examples of our proposals would be for the Congress to enact a law to specifying the amount of contribution limit. And then next slide. We also want the increase of our expenditure limit within a reasonable range. Okay, next slide. Comelec may also make use of technological advancements in data gathering for real-time monitoring of electoral campaign finance. And then also for the strengthening of our current election management body, we may want to consider to create a new department in Comelec to handle political party finance and electoral campaign finance. And then lastly, for good governance, we want civil society organizations to undertake a citizen engagement campaign on good governance standards for public services. So with that, I end my presentation and thank you for listening to our a summary of our research paper. The specific discussion can be found on, as stated by Felicia a while ago, that this will be provided in the chat box. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attorney Reyes. I think a very important finding in the research that you did was that political parties do not achieve the goal of effectively representing their constituents. This highlights that pushing for political party reforms is not for political parties per se, but for their constituents, and so the need for everyone's involvement in this endeavor. All right, for those interested to get copies of the research results, please get in touch with Dente and pursue them. And yes, I was informed that we have a guest in the audience. Before we move to the next part, let me please recognize Honorable Ras Mitmuk, Member of Parliament of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority. Thank you for joining us, sir. And again, for our participants, please feel free to use our Q&A box at the bottom of your screens for your questions. And for documentation purposes, please indicate your name and the organization you represent, as well as the speaker who you wish to answer your question. All right. Our next resource person is one of the 5 members of the Drug Price Advisory Council, an executive body to the Secretary of Health, created by law to ensure the implementation of Republic Act 9502, or the Universally Accessible, Cheaper, and Quality Medicines Act of 2008. She also provides legal advice on policy creation and implementation, as well as mainstreaming gender and development approaches. Our speaker prepared a recorded message on challenges to and prospect for campaign finance law and policy in the Philippines, but she will also be available later for your questions. So please let us hear from Attorney Patricia Miranda. All right, I think we're having some technical difficulties. Are we ready with the video? All right, could you please allow us to troubleshoot this problem and let us have our wellness break first. And then when we come back, we will have the recorded message of Attorney Miranda on cue. Okay, so let us have our wellness break first for 5 minutes. It's 10:55 in my clock, so I hope to be joined again by everyone by 11 a.m. Thank you. are back. I hope we managed to handle that technical problem. So let me know, please, if we're ready with the video. And I'd like to make clarifications. Our next speaker represents Strengthening Human Rights and Peace Research and Education in ASEAN or Southeast Asia. That's Shape C. All right, so let's see. We're good.
Good morning, everyone. Grateful to be here with you all today. My name is Patty Miranda. I'm currently the Digital Engagement Specialist of ShapeC. ShapeC is a regional human rights program housed at Mahidol University in Thailand. I was also a former legal researcher for the Joko Setono Research Center, or DRC, a law institute under the Faculty of Law, University of Indonesia. But first, a short introduction about our work at ShapeC. The ASEAN University Network on Human Rights Education is a network of 30 member universities. It collaborates with the Southeast Asian Human Rights Studies Network to jointly run the ShapeC program. In the Philippines, UP, Ateneo, and DLSU are the 3 universities involved with the ASEAN University Network. ShapeC envisions and works towards a culture of human rights and peace in Southeast Asia through research, education, and academic activism. We cannot properly discuss campaign finance reforms in this country without also highlighting the mutually reinforcing relationship between good governance and human rights. So please do visit our website at shapec.org to learn more. Today, I will be providing a snapshot from a paper I wrote on campaign finance as a researcher for DRC. You can access this paper and more on Preludem's website, which hosts the first volume of the Asia-Pacific Journal of Election and Democracy. I hope what I share with you all today helps provoke future research and contribute to current debates by surfacing gaps and silences in law and policy that can create exclusion and threaten democratic and participatory systems. In my article, I make the case that issues and voices left out of the reform agenda can be just as important as what is covered. In the Philippines, the centrality of money during elections is a governance problem. Socially excluded, lesser known, or historically underfunded candidates, such as women and persons of diverse SOGI, indigenous peoples, young people, and people with disabilities, and many groups who have had to cope with systemic violence and discrimination, aside from the added barriers of limited access to economic resources and rising campaign costs. Transparency of political party and campaign contributions is rightly seen as essential to protecting the integrity of democratic processes and ensuring that elections are fair, free, and credible. Good governance is about improving government institutions to serve the public better. And this bears stressing participatory decision-making. So, if elections are considered to be democratic choice expressed through the ballot, to quote a 1995 landmark Supreme Court case, then access to campaign finance can potentially increase the participation of qualified and deserving candidates. Of course, a well-financed campaign does not, on its own, always guarantee victory. We know that. But it cannot be ignored that there is ample evidence in the Philippines and elsewhere that access to campaign funding helps scale up the quantity, that is, the amount or number, and the intensity. By that, we mean comprehensiveness or scope of campaign activities, and this enables candidates to convey messages to a bigger voter base. However, if campaign financing is not properly regulated, money or a candidate's proximity to deep pockets opens doors for undue influence to occur, conflicts of interest, or regulatory capture. This erodes public trust. Ensuring equal access to opportunities for public service and the prohibition of political dynasties are constitutionally mandated in the Philippines. But this is accompanied by the limiting provision as may be defined by law, which means further defining and operationalizing these constitutional guarantees have been mainly left to the will and interests of lawmakers. These were just some of the issues discussed during last year's regional workshop on election integrity, organized by Perludem and DRC. Regional and national perspectives on democratic and accountable campaign finance were explored. For example, Ellen Weintraub from the US Federal Election Commission shared how accountability and transparency underpin campaign finance reform efforts. Damaso Magual, representing ANFREL and NAMFREL, shared that more than a fair, accountable, and equitable formula, more focus is also needed on implementation, monitoring compliance, and reporting to appropriate regulatory bodies. Other perspectives spotlighted that although direct technical support and expertise on different country contexts are available, which can be a good source of comparative knowledge, these do not automatically lead to stronger local institutions, nor do they lead necessarily to broader or stronger regional networks around shared issues. Against this backdrop, I used feminist researcher Carol Bacci's What is a Problem Represented to Be, or the WPR approach. I used this to interrogate how equal access to opportunities for public service is defined and represented in Philippine campaign finance law and policy. Focusing on gaps, silences, assumptions, and their effects can open up a range of new questions that other more traditional approaches can omit. I looked at historical and other contextual issues that could form part of deeper conversations around electoral integrity, political participation, and representation, but are yet to be fully explored. These can be new areas for research and study. Analyzing what is on the reform agenda also includes looking at what issues and whose voices are left out. In addition, the WPR approach challenges the conventional and pervasive view that laws address problems. Sometimes, or oftentimes, the law itself is the problem. The Omnibus Election Code, while it has undergone amendments, including the 1987 Constitution on the powers of the Comelec, this law, despite its length and bulk, has remained mostly the same over the past 3 decades. The 1987 Constitution also introduced a party list system to promote inclusion by broadening the representation in the House of Representatives and facilitating access to representation of minority or marginalized groups who may not have access to sufficient funding or political machinery otherwise. However, studies from the Philippine Commission on Women show that the plurality system affects political parties or groups' preference to finance male candidates who, due to social and gender norms, are perceived to have higher probabilities of winning the election compared to women. Cutting across various laws, policies, and regulations is the need to prevent not just actual but also perceived corruption, or the coercive influence of large financial contributions on candidates' positions and their actions if elected to office. Empirical evidence backs this up. For example, Kerubin's research on political dynasties show that more than half of elected Philippine members of Congress and governors have a relative who has been previously elected into office, and provides additional evidence of state monopoly and capture by powerful and wealthy families who can afford to run these big and expensive campaigns. Also, the Supreme Court in a 2014 case upheld the disqualification of a candidate who spent approximately 575% more than the 4 million pesos that they were authorized to spend. The court wanted to avoid a precedent, and I quote, of unlimited expenditure for political advertising. Another example, this time from PCIJ in the report published a few months ago, it informs us that some candidates in the 2016 election spent as much as 60 to 70% of their net worth prior to the elections. And more recently, during the 2019 midterm elections, again, PCIJ tracked senatorial candidates' spending and found that all the top spenders' expenses exceeded their net worth declared in their SALNs. Disclosure requirements contribute to ensuring transparency and prevent conflicts of interest. There's a risk that parties and candidates who, once in office, will likely be responsive to the interests of a particular group of donors rather than the wider public interest, especially when donors expect sweetheart deals or political favors, for example, through public procurement, lawmaking, or watering down or even scrapping public health regulations. So this provision should be read alongside recent amendments to the Corporation Code, which enables domestic corporations to give donations in aid of any political party or candidate or for purposes of partisan political activity. Before, the old Corporation Code absolutely prohibited both foreign and domestic corporations from donating to any political party or candidate. Now, a non-exempted domestic corporation can donate to any political party or candidate during elections or contribute to any partisan political activity. The full impacts of this revision will most likely be seen in the upcoming Halalan 2022. An overlooked area of prohibited sources of campaign contributions impacts public health and good governance. The WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, or the FCTC, the first global health treaty to which the Philippines is a state party, is the basis for prohibiting tobacco industry donations and sponsorships. This includes banning not just political contributions during campaign periods, but all donations to the government at all times, with no exceptions, to protect the Philippine government from tobacco industry interference. Article 5.3 of the FCTC and additional policy commitments by the Philippine government, even with the relaxing of the rule on corporate donations in the revised Corporation Code, tobacco corporations cannot be allowed to make campaign contributions, nor could these donations or contributions be accepted by candidates who are holding public office or working for the government. The legal definition of tobacco industry is broad enough to include the CSR arms of tobacco companies, their charitable foundations, industry front groups, and those other groups and bodies representing the commercial and vested interests of the tobacco industry. In the interest of time, I'll focus on the need to build an evidence base around measures that promote participation and include more diverse voices in campaign finance discussions. These are really new avenues for future research. For example, the bills in Congress, a positive step forward, especially the provisions that will enable Comelec to adjust the amount of authorized election expenses every 6 years based on the inflation rate and consumer price indices. However, it's important to also ensure that other proposals, such as dedicated campaign funds for women and marginalized candidates, as proposed by PCW, are included. UN Women also has a wealth of resources and has advocated specific measures to overcome the barriers of gender discrimination in national and local elections, including supporting women's political participation in multiple ways, whether it's through gender quotas and political finance reforms to increase diversity in public office. To conclude, using transformative or feminist methodologies allow us to look at campaign finance issues differently. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, who are our chosen leaders steering us all this 2022 and beyond to what we hope is safety and dignity? The resulting analysis may prove helpful in outlining avenues for future research, law reform, and policy advocacy efforts. It invites us to envision alternative and inclusive proposals to ensure that the ability to run for public office rests on merit rather than the deep pockets and financial influence of candidates. And with that, I end my presentation. If you have any questions or want to discuss further, we can continue the conversation during the Q&A or online. Please keep in touch with us at ShapeC. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge the photos from Vina Salazar. Thank you so much, V, for loaning the photos, and feedback from Joel Mark Barredo, ShapeC's Program Director. Salamat.
Maraming salamat, Attorney Miranda, for sharing your work and informing reforms to improve campaign finance practice in the Philippines to ensure an equal playing field for all. We understand the importance of this as we believe that adherence to campaign finance rules or lack of it tells so much as to how candidates will perform when elected into office. All right, we move to our next speaker, who will discuss the role of election management body on political party finance. We have this morning the head of the Campaign Finance Office of the Commission on Elections. As the head of the CFO, he ensures that the office performs its mandate under Philippine electoral laws. Fellow advocates, let's please welcome Attorney Prime Baguid.
Thank you, Ma'am Florina Simon. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning to everyone, and that I hope that we are all safe, no? And I am asked now to discuss about the role of the election management body in the political party finance. Okay. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay. So let's have some preliminaries, of course, for the benefit of others. No, the election management body in the Philippines is the Commission on Elections, or what we call simply as Comelec. No? It is one of the 3 constitutional commissions. You have your Commission on Audit, Civil Service Commissions, and Comelec. No, the Philippine government has 3 separate branches or department. The executive, which implement the laws, the judiciary that interpret the laws, and the legislative one that enact the laws. No, we have 2 chambers or houses: the upper house, which is the Senate, and the lower house as the House of Representatives. No, the Comelec being a constitutional commission, it is independent from the legislative, executive, and judiciary. In fact, it is a highly specialized administrative body tasked to enforce and administer all laws relative to the conduct of elections, plebiscite, initiative, referendum, and recall. No. The Philippines is a signatory to other conventions to move to. And the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, or the UNCAC, outlines the basic concept of political finance transparency in Article 7.3 that calls to consider taking appropriate legislative and administrative measures to enhance transparency in the funding of candidatures in public office, and where applicable, the funding of the political parties' financing, no, including the requirements of public annual accounts. In connection thereto, on October of 2015, and in the preparation of the coming 2016 election, the CFU, another unit, was renamed into a campaign finance office. No? This office was primarily served or responsible for the implementation of all existing campaign finance laws, rules, and regulation. It shall also be responsible for the implementation of all subsequent legislative acts related to campaign finance enacted by Congress, as well as the implementation through the various issuances of implementing rules and regulations promulgated by the Commission. Okay, so foundation of campaign finance regulations are based primarily, of course, in our provisions of our Constitution, the Omnibus Election Code. You have there the laws, specifically, particularly the Republic Act 7166 and the Republic Act 9006, or Fair Election Act. Republic Act 7166, that is an act as synchronizing national and local elections. No? And of course, the number 4, no, the Comelec issuance of implementing rules and regulations. Next slide. Okay, political party finance. No, but before we go there, no, of course, about the political party situation here in the Philippines, we have a multi-party system. Many political parties, no, so long as they are accredited or registered by the Commission on Elections, they are allowed to compete or field candidates and compete in given elections. No? Political party, as we know, is an organization or group of persons holding similar ideas about politics, promoting ideology, platform or government or policy goals. But in actuality, because of this multi-party system, the political parties tend to depend on the personalities of the candidate or the winnability of the candidate rather than on the issues and the political platforms that they have or offering to the people. So this is a clear sign of weak political party system. No, traditional politicians view political parties as a financial vehicle for them to win the elections. No, so once they got elected, so they would soon, for example, realize that they have a different political party than that of that sitting president. So many of them will switch or turn court political party affiliation to other political party. And of course, they keep on reasoning that so that to ensure that they will have a proper support funding on the projects that they have. So if they have the same political party with the sitting president, they can have easy access to public funds to support their projects. So we can see that there is an absence of party loyalty or adherence to the party's ideological principles, platforms, and programs. No, there are pending bills in the Senate and Congress that aim to strengthen our political party system and address this political turncoatism, or what we call as political butterflies. No? Those politicians or those people who float from one political party to another for their own purposes and convenience and personal interest. Now we cannot divorce the concept of strengthening political party from that of campaign finance regulations, because campaign finance pertains to money, and money is indispensable for the campaign activities of political parties. These two concepts are inseparable. So how the political parties manage or raise campaign funds? So they are raising funds through internal or external. Internal funds may come from the membership fees or from the income or funds generated by the property of the political party. The other one is external funding. External funding may either be public financing, private financing, or mixed financing. So public financing, there is a state subsidy which is given by the government, and the public funds is used for political activities. But not all subsidies given by the government are in the form of money. Some of them are exemptions in fees or government services like postage. So you have there the case in, I think they do that in Australia and Canada. Now in the Philippines, we don't have this one, no? State subsidy, but there are pending bills so similar to this, where the government will fund the activities of the political parties before the elections, or reimburse those expenses made by the political parties after the elections. I remember one of the feature of those proposed bill. One of the features that a political party once availed the subsidy from the government is not is prohibited from accepting private financing. Okay, so the number two, external funding is the private financing. So it is through private contribution to finance political campaigns. These contributions may come either from private individuals or corporations. And number three, there is the mixed financing. It is a combination of private contributions and public money. So we focus on the private financing because this is one that is applicable in the Philippines. So now, who can make contributions? No, under the law, any person can make contributions provided that they are not prohibited by law. So Other than that, anonymous contributions are not allowed. Contributor is not allowed to use any other name except his true name. So you don't use proxy name, aliases. No. The true name of the contributor must appear in the record or the receiving political party. No. So except those prohibited by our law, any person can make a contribution. So including corporations. No, before, as already told by the previous speakers, corporations in the Philippines are not allowed to make contribution to partisan political activities. But in 2019, sometime February, it was signed by the incumbent president. The law, Republic Act 11232, allows the domestic corporation to make a reasonable donation for purposes of partisan political activities. Since this is a new law, of course, its application will surely cause an impact in our 2022 national local elections. And there is a need to come up with the rules and regulations to implement this law. Together with the Lente, we have already drafted the said rules and regulations pertaining to corporate contributions. It is subject for review and approval by the Project Management Office and eventually the Commission and Bank. Okay. So, who are not allowed to make contributions? So, under the Omnibus Election Code, sections 95, no? So, public and private financial institutions. Number 2, operators of public utilities or those in possession of or exploiting any natural resources of the nation, those who hold contract or subcontracts to supply goods and services for the government, and guarantees of franchises, incentives, exemptions, allocations, similar privileges, or concession by the government, which includes the government-owned and controlled corporations, those granted loans or other accommodations or for more in the amount of more than 100,000, excuse me, by the government, including GOCCs, within 1 year before the election day, educational institutions that receive grants from public fund in the amount of more than 100,000. You also have there the public employees and officials in the government service, the foreigners and the foreign corporations and the foreign government. So, as already also mentioned, that with respect to contribution, there is no limit. No, a person can contribute as much as he can, as much as he wanted. No, contributions are not subject to donors tax. In case that not all contributions are spent by political parties for its campaign, the unexpended balance shall be subject to income tax. While it is true that there is no limitation on the contribution that the political party may receive, however, with respect to the expenditures campaign, it cannot exceed the cap of or limitation provided by law. Now, in our law, the political parties are allowed only to spend 5 pesos. The candidates with political parties are allowed to spend a separate 3 pesos, while candidates or independent candidates are allowed to spend 5 pesos. Now, violation of this, the limit set by law, constitutes an overspending and shall be liable for election offense. So, mandatory submission of campaign finance disclosure reports. Campaign finance disclosure is an essential public accountability mechanism to uphold the transparency and accountability in the electoral process. Candidates and electoral parties are required to submit the statement of contribution and expenditures. We simply call it as a SOSE, an acronym SOSE. The SOSE includes the data on the amount of the expenses of the candidate, the amount of the contribution that he received, the name of the contributors, the names of the contractors, so and other relevant data that are necessary for the successful audit of the campaign finance. So under Republic Act 7166, it is mandatory for political parties to submit their SOSE within 30 days from the date of elections. Now, elected officials whose political parties fail to submit SOSE are not allowed to assume office. So, despite that elected official has submitted his SOSE, but his political party has not yet submitted the SOSE, then he is not allowed to assume office until the political parties made compliance with the provision of the law. There are other sanctions that may be imposed against the erring political parties for violation of campaign finance. It may consist on the imposition of or payment of fines, cancellation of their registration or accreditation, or even imprisonment of the officers of the political parties or the person responsible for the commission of the illegal act. Now, these sanctions are considered the teeth of regulations, which serves as deterrent to violators, and at the same time, it is also indirectly promoting compliance to political parties and candidates. The Comelec is fully aware that if campaign finance laws are strictly implemented, it will level at least the playing field between the candidates from a well-funded political parties and those poor candidates. In our Constitution, under Section 26 of Article 2, it is stated there that the state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities for public service. So, money should not be a determination, a factor in determining or a factor for the entrance in the public service, and it should not also determine the results of the elections. Too much circulation or money circulating in the elections is a serious threat to democracy, as it poses to undermine the determination of the will of the people as expressed in ballots. In fact, it is considered as an antecedent or a precursor crime of vote buying and vote selling. The right to vote is a sacred right. It is outside the commerce of man, and the commission is determined to remain it as that, beyond the commerce of man. So let me end my discussion there. Next slide, please. With a quote from a decision in the case of Nolasco versus Comelec. This involves the disqualification of a majority candidate. The Supreme Court upheld the disqualification, among other grounds, for vote buying and vote selling of that candidate. And the Supreme Court said that the dispute at bar involves more than the majority of the municipality of Maykawayan, Bulacan. It concerns the right of suffrage, which is the bedrock of republicanism. Suffrage is the means by which our people express their sovereign judgment. Its free exercise must be protected, especially against the purchasing power of the peso. So, again, so with that, I end my my discussion on this matter, Thank you very much. So if we have a question regarding my discussion, I'm free to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney Bag-id. PCIJ is a witness to the efforts of the Comelec in improving campaign finance practice in the country, including political party finance rules implementation and monitoring. But as shared by our previous speakers also, a lot has to be done still, right? And so we must all remain vigilant. And yes, our next presentation will dig in deeper on the role of media in campaign finance monitoring. Our next speaker is a journalist and a journalism educator. She reports for and manages the editorial desk of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. She works with reporting fellows and visual storytellers to help shine a light on underreported issues, including campaign finance. She also teaches investigative reporting and data journalism at journalism schools. Fellow advocates, please welcome Ms. Carol Ilaga.
Thank you, Florine. Hi, everyone. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Kita naman po.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Again po, good morning to everyone. I am happy and honored to be part of the panel. So I was asked to talk about the role of media in monitoring campaign finance. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll be sharing our experience po from PCIJ in the several elections po that we've reported on the elections and also on campaign finance. We're also part of a community of media organizations and civil society groups that are also monitoring developments in terms of campaign finance reform. So sa dulo po, I will be also sharing some recommendations from these observations. So let me start po. So, okay. Campaign finance, of course, as we know, is an important, if not the most important aspect of any electoral exercise because one's capacity to run for office is largely hinged on their access to resources. Raising and spending of money in elections has implications beyond election day. It has links that may predict or define how a candidate or a political party will govern. Kanina nga po, nabanggit po ni Commissioner Gia na actually pwede rin pong tingnan natin ang campaign finance beyond the context of elections, but also as an anti-corruption and a good governance activity more than it is just an election activity. So dito po, we go back to the question, especially in the Philippine context, why candidates use so much of their personal money in order to convince people that they are worthy of the public's trust. So it has become even more imperative for the media to report on campaign finance and also the wealth of public officials, not only during the election period. Now, I'm going to give a brief history of campaign finance reporting in the Philippines. I think maganda pong maintindihan yung history pong ito because it says a lot about the development, the opportunities, as well as the challenges that we have ahead pa rin po as discussed by our panelists earlier. So, the coverage of campaign finance, although far from ideal, has come a long way po from being ignored to becoming a key part of public discourse. While news coverage has included money matters such as vote buying or who's who on the rich list, the last decade has seen a gradual shift in the media's focus on the influence of money in politics and vice versa. The shift, kahit po gradual, may be traced back to collective efforts done by election watchdogs freedom of information advocates, and media groups to bring campaign finance high on the election agenda. So nabanggit po ito kanina. Actually, importanteng taon po yung 2007. In 2007, a network of civil society organizations formed the Pera at Politica, or the Money and Politics Consortium, to conduct activities to review how and why candidates spend huge sums of money to get elected. These included the counting of campaign posters, estimating how much each poster would cost, and projecting how much candidates spent. This was done through the support of the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. And through this, the network was able to follow the money during the 2010 elections. The group also held public events during the campaign, highlighting the huge advertising spending by candidates, at the same time tackling various election issues. The work done by civil society, complemented by the media covering these activities, helped push the demand for the Commission on Elections to take on concrete steps to institutionalize campaign finance work. So tulad din po ng nabanggit kanina, especially po with the presentation of Attorney Prime Bagid, malaki po yung naging pagbabago po sa Comelec. At the time po, then a new commissioner, lawyer Christian Robert S. Lim, took the cudgels of leading the campaign finance unit by crafting a plan and overseeing how Comelec could perform this role. Prior to the formation of the CFU, the enforcement of campaign finance regulations was under the Comelec Law Department. With Commissioner Lim heading the CFU, Comelec embarked on a massive training of all of its field officers for them to better understand their role in campaign finance regulation work. Consultations were also done with political parties on how campaign finance rules can be implemented on ground. And then later po, the CFU would later become the Campaign Finance Office. So punta po tayo now, campaign finance reporting today. As I've mentioned po, we've come a long way, but of course, malaki pa rin po yung room for improvement. In fact, the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility that does monitoring of campaign finance reporting or election reporting in general, every elections. In their reports po, it showed that campaign finance does not get a lot of coverage in mainstream news. Primarily po, pag tiningnan yung themes, campaign conduct in the last two presidential elections still top the list of themes covered by the news media. So that's where we are right now. But again, we've come a long way. But again, marami pa pong pwedeng improve in terms of reporting on campaign finance. I'd like to highlight a few points that I think is important to look at, especially for the upcoming May 2022 elections. What is going to be the face of campaign finance during a pandemic? Where will campaign money go, especially now that candidates are limited from doing in-person activities? So these are actually also the same questions that we're trying to figure out po as we prepare for our coverage for the May 2022 elections, because our situation is different from before, where you have candidates na nakakapag-conduct po ng sorties or campaign rallies, physical activities. But the situation is different now. And I saw in one of the questions po earlier that there was a question about the use of social media for campaigning. So that is something that we're also looking into. As mentioned po, there are several avenues in monitoring campaign finance. On the side of the media, we look at the elections as a cycle. Actually, it's not just during, we often hear the word, it's election season, it's election year again, but we'd like to think that this is actually a cycle po, even prior to the campaign period itself. We have a role to look at what happens before, during the campaign period, and of course after elections. For before the campaign period, it was highlighted earlier, the importance to look at pre-campaign activities. I mentioned earlier social media advertising, and of course the use of government resources. During the campaign period, pasok pa rin po dyan use of government resources and also use of own money of our candidates, especially those who are incumbent or who are public officials. And after elections, usually we look at compliance in terms of election rules. We look at donors, overspenders, yung hindi po nagpa-file ng SOSE, the campaign finance report, excess donations, violations, if any, government contracts, as well as appointments. As for recommendations that I shared earlier, again, this is informed by our engagement with the other news organizations and also civil society groups. First, of course, improving the coverage of campaign finance will take a village, from newsrooms reassessing its election coverage, candidates and parties being more forthcoming with information, to Congress and Comelec instituting campaign finance reforms, and institutions of accountability taking part. First po is open and timely access to information. Campaign finance disclosures are submitted 30 days after election day, and depending on when the Comelec CFO is able to compile the records. So the documents may not be publicly available until 2 or 3 months post-elections. So one recommendation, if at all possible, is it may be good to consider the release of sources during the campaign period as opposed to the current timeline. Apart from allowing reporters a peek into the spending and donations of candidates and parties somewhat real time, this practice may also help prevent candidates and parties from massaging their reports to comply with rules. Comelec and election watchdogs should also maybe encourage candidates and parties to provide timely updates about their donors and expenditures. And of course, we've also included here the importance of the SALN. In the Philippines, we have a document called the Statement of Assets, Liabilities, and Net Worth. So basically, this is the asset record of our government officials. Now, this is an important record, so we know whether a particular candidate, if he or she is an incumbent official or has been an official before, has the capacity to use his or her personal money for the campaign. But right now, we are facing difficulties with accessing the SALNs. Of the 5 or 6 repositories, only 2 repositories now in the Philippines are allowing the public to look at SALNs. So I think, again, it's important for the SALNs to be public. And then at the same time, perhaps it's also good to encourage candidates to voluntarily disclose their SALNs. Second, as mentioned also earlier, given the Comelec's history, the establishment of the CFO is already a welcome development. But we were also thinking that it might be good also to have more experts, perhaps such as auditors, certified public accountants, and financial analysts in the CFO's roster. The strict compliance of contractors and media entities in providing receipts and advertising contracts is greatly needed as well. Of course, we know po that the SOSE is self-reporting essentially, so the CFO would have to rely on third-party sources to verify a candidate's declaration. Without complete submission from these entities, particularly the media, which receive bulk of campaign funds for advertising, it would be difficult to conduct an airtight audit. And as mentioned earlier, internet advertising is also not clearly defined yet in the law. So it's a challenge also for us, the media, how to monitor internet advertising. So, and finally, we're also looking at if it's possible for Comelec to engage with other institutions of accountability, like the Bureau of Internal Revenue, the Office of the Ombudsman, and the Commission Audit, in developing a recording system which could result in a document, a database for anti-corruption work. And as for the media, newsrooms and news management must see the value of campaign finance beyond the context of elections. So this could come in the form of linking elections with other beats, such as business and finance, accountability, corruption, or local reporting. There's also need to sustain election coverage as it has multiple forward and backward links and is hinged upon other issues such as procurement, business, and the participation of marginalized sectors. And finally, babalikan ko po yung nangyari noong 2007, what happened in 2007, which was an important year for campaign finance in the Philippines, forging and sustainable collaboration between and among elections watchdog and the news media. The Philippine experience in monitoring campaign finance, as I've mentioned, took a significant shift when election watchdogs and the news media made it high on their respective agendas. The Money and Politics Consortium, for instance, was regarded as a key source of campaign finance information during the campaigns at the time. So I believe that was 2010 and 2013. But this was made possible through the support of aid agencies. The work of individual election watchdogs continued beyond the life of the consortium, but efforts to sustain such collaboration might be worth revisiting. So that's all for me. Thank you everyone for listening. I'd be happy to discuss further later po sa ating open forum. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ilagan. Indeed, it will take a village, right? And the village will definitely include the electorate's participation in monitoring compliance to campaign finance rules. We see a lot of challenges and we see the need to have everybody's participation, to have everybody on board. All right, so we've been talking about political party finance, and as such, it is also important to hear from the side of political parties. And we have our next speaker for that purpose to particularly discuss the importance of political party finance and political party survival. Our next speaker graduated from the University of the Philippines with degrees in philosophy, cum laude, and law. He got his master's in public administration from the Maxwell School in New York as a Fulbright scholar. After placing 8th in the 2009 bar examinations, he joined government service under the late President Noynoy Aquino as director and later undersecretary at the Presidential Management Staff. At present, he is the chief of staff to third-term Senator and Partido Liberal President Francis Pangilinan. He is also a part-time lecturer at the UP College of Law and co-founder of Iwala, I hope I got that right, a digital solutions startup. Friends, let me turn over the virtual floor to Attorney Third Bagro.
Thank you very much, Florine, for that introduction, and thank you for the organizers and the supporters of this conference. Let me just share my screen. All right, are you able? Yeah, okay. I hope you're able to see my screen. So I have 50 minutes, and I hope to be able to beat the time so that we can have a good discussion and break for lunch. So I was already introduced earlier. Let me just share a quick note that I joined the Liberal Party first as a youth volunteer in 2012. And in the course of several years, I've been involved in different aspects of the party organization, and now as chief of staff to the party president. So the question.
There's a dialogue box.
Dialogue box. Okay.
It says audience window.
Let me just. Okay. Is that better? Is that better, Florine?
It's black from my end.
Is it there?
There you go. Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. So I was tasked to say what the role is or the importance is of political party finance to the survival of political parties. But in the Philippines, actually, it's not a question of survival, but it's whether whether we like it or not. Political parties are here to stay, precisely because the Constitution provides for it or mentions it 6 times, and all our laws on elections and electoral processes really look at political parties as the main avenues for for launch pads, if you may, for political actors. So it's not a question of whether they will survive, but like many of us feel in 2020 and 2021, will political parties languish, continue to languish, or will they survive? And more so, will they thrive? Academicians are correct in saying that political parties are so far characterized by being clientelistic or centered on the charismatic personalities. In the Philippines, political parties really don't have grassroots basis, and political dynasties are very much still part of or a major part of the equation, whether at the local level or at the national level. In fact, the Philippine Constitution passed in 1987 precisely discussed this problem of political dynasties and mandated that they be prohibited by law. But since 1987, Congress has failed to pass an anti-political dynasty law. So it's not surprising to see, for example, that the main political party or the major political party at present is now being subject to warring factions within, claiming that they deserve to be the leaders of that party or claiming the party to be theirs. This is not the first time that this is happening, and it's usually the front runners of presidential contests that are really doing the tussling for the political parties. And I note that in June 2018, there was a survey done by the Pulse Asia saying that only 6% of those surveyed, which is this is nationally representative. They surveyed registered voters. They say 6% only say they favor a political party. So that means there really isn't relevance to political parties, at least for the people. So it's relevant for politicians, but is it relevant for the people? Strictly speaking, political parties should articulate and aggregate social interests, develop political programs, and help in political socialization of citizens, or what we say politicization. Right? But it happens to a very few extent, but the general public will think of political parties as the parties of politicians, the parties of the sitting president, for example. So they are launch pads for political parties. But political parties are not only existing during election time. In fact, in the off season, if we can say that, there should be a lot of activities that political parties undertake. So the focus of the presentation really is political party finance that really pertains to money for party functions that are outside of elections. And I think that the quality of our political parties, to a large extent, determines to which extent the public interest is served. So what does an effective political party do? I put them in 3 buckets. A political party or an effective political party must set a clear vision, It must be always on persuading people, whether internally or externally. It must also set up effective decision making. So a political party must set its program of government. What does it? How does it assess the country? What are its diagnoses? What is the prognosis? What are its values and principles that is differentiated? It should be constantly persuading its membership to stay, to pay party dues. It must persuade volunteers to help them, and persuade and voters, as possible voters, to support it. Also, a political party must be able to decide as an organization and not break apart. And on another level, a political party must train its leaders for top quality decision making, because that's the only way that they can, if and when they are elected into office, push for the party program. But these things need particular activities to be done, right? So setting up a vision, there should be research, there should be polling, monitoring and analysis, monitoring and evaluation, data analysis. For persuasion, you have to train and educate your members, your volunteers, data management, communications, strategic communications and operational communications, digital communications. For decision making, you have to have conflict management courses, negotiation, and advanced leadership education, to name just a few, right? So if we're thinking of a political party that is effective, that will pursue the interest of the public, then an effective political party must do and be just three of them. So, for example, if you do polling and if you subscribe to a reputable firm, you will be charged a 2-day training for 1,000 people. That would cost you around $40,000 US. And if you want to enroll your leaders or 10 students to an executive education program, that would cost you $30,000 US, and only for 10 students. And this is just for three items. So you can just imagine the pressure for political parties for those political parties that want to be effective. There is such a huge pressure to deliver on what they need to do, or what is expected from them, and what they are getting. So now who is actually footing the bill for this? Now it's business, NGOs, the academia, international partners, and politicians forking out their own funds. And government, to a large extent, is not providing for any of these, shall I say, mandatories for effective political parties. So there are upsides to this, right? So if government is not funding these items of cost, then the scarce resources of government are spent for social services, which for a developing country like the Philippines would be logical, right? It's also good because political parties are forced to invent, forced to be resourceful. Their entrepreneurship is promoted, right? They say that necessity is the mother of invention. So maybe that's what's happening to political parties. And also, lastly, only those political parties who are able to withstand all these pressures will survive. But there are also downsides to the status quo. Of course, it is not transparent, right? So we don't know the conflicts of interest that may arise for businesses providing funds for political party finance outside of elections, because these are not regulated, as was pointed out in the study. We don't also know the favors or the sweetheart deals that may come out after when they are elected. whether they will be favored in terms of programs or even appointments to government positions. Another downside is the possibility of capturing the agenda of government because of these invisible strings attached. This also perpetuates the charismatic leader or the oversized influence of charismatic leaders who are popular. And if they are popular or perceived as popular, then money or funding can be the next step if you have a popular candidate. And also it perpetuates political dynasties because over the course of the years, these oligarchs and political dynasts have accumulated power, influence, and money that they're able to dole out to our population, basically who is a very poor population, right? It also promotes short-term thinking. So politicians and political parties just think of the next election in terms of really their mandate of thinking about what is good for the next generations. This also leads to abuse of state resources because if political parties don't have too much value added, then when politicians win, they would think of government resources as their source for doling out favors, right? And most importantly for me, this this limits grassroots ownership of political parties. And this is I say this because number one, in the Philippines, crowdfundings or making small-time donations for political parties, or at least during election period, is very it's difficult to do. You will have to have a notarized document to show that you have donated to a particular candidate, even for just a small amount, and that would be unheard of for someone who is working on a 9-to-5 job for even to imagine to do. Another one is because of I'll get to this part later on. All right, so ideally, who should foot the bill? Should it be the private sector or the government? But I think as I saw in literature, even in advanced countries, there is debate whether or not funding political parties is providing the right incentives for political parties to perform. So I think there should be a healthy balance between public and private funding. With limited public coffers for a developing country like the Philippines, we have to earmark public finance from government for activities that are considered to generate the highest public value added. So, for example, maybe training your elected officials, or training those that are running for office, right? Instead of NGOs now partnering with international aid agencies to create these magnificent and very value-adding events, educational sessions for them, this has to be invested on by government. Such funding should also be linked to equity conditions. So maybe gender conditions, or even turncoatism. It has to discourage or even penalize turncoats. So if there is public funds used for political parties, then that could be a condition. So political party funding should also promote multiple parties and not favor a few. It also has to be transparently allocated, and should be outcomes based. So there has to be some level of commitment on political parties on what they would want to do with the public funds allocated to them. Government should act as an angel investor, I think, to start up political parties if we really think they are important. But it should not be used by political parties to be overly reliant on public funds. So there has to be incentives for put in place for the private sector to be able to crowdsource. So with the advent of digital technology, we can see that in digital payments, it has become more of a norm rather than the exception, and it should be that should be taken advantage of by political parties. There has to be simpler ways of reporting and donating from small donors, and this will promote grassroots ownership of political parties. Also in the Philippines, I note that the lowest level of political representation in the villages or barangay, and also in the youth councils, they are technically or legally by law not allowed to participate in partisan activities. I think this cuts off the connection between the grassroots and the political party. So I think that should also change. And some few thoughts: our political parties determine the extent and pace of our country's development. So our political leaders at the national level, they control the pace of the spending for 20% of our GDP. So that's 20% of the whole GDP is really controlled by elected leaders. And that this is why I say our political parties, as the jumping off point of these political leaders, they determine the extent and pace of our development as a country. So if you really want to save democracy, I think the first or one of the first order of business would be to level up political parties. And with the help of the public sector and the private sector, both pitching in at the local and national levels, I think we can make political parties not languish, but thrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Bagro. A lot of things to absorb and consider. We need to save democracy, right? We need strong political parties that serve and represent the interest of their constituents, but also we need to ensure that abuse does not happen, that conflicts of interests are monitored and addressed, and that efforts do not undermine other priorities that also promote the interest of their constituents. All right, we obviously went beyond our time, so but we hope you can still give us a few minutes more just so we can address the questions that were raised in the Q&A box. Our panel is an active panel, and they've already answered the questions, but I would still like to mention them. There's a question from Dika Dika. The use of online political campaigning is growing. Nevertheless, for example, in Indonesia, there's a regulation gap or loophole in the transparency of online campaign spending. Is the Philippines facing a similar problem? What does the EMB or Comelec and CSOs have done to solve that problem? Is there any future plan to monitor online political ads? Attorney Bagid already answered. So would you like to expound, sir?
Yes, Ma'am Florin, okay. Yes, I have answered the question of Sir Dick. We also face the same problem. Actually, with this pandemic, we look this to be really will grow exponentially, the use of online political campaigning. However, in the Philippines, we have here a law, Republic Act 9006, entitled the Fair Election Act, which requires the mass media entities to submit reports to Comelec regarding the campaign ads of the political parties and the candidates. In implementing that law, the Commission election, through the issuance of rules and regulation, define mass media entities to include social media. Those are entities that offers campaign ads through digital platforms. No, the Comelec, no, through the Campaign Finance Office and EID are in constant communication or coordination, no, with Facebook, and in fact, um, we will be having our final revision on the implementing rules and regulations resolutions on that I think this coming Friday. So probably next week we will be having the resolutions. This resolution governing the requires the social media entities not to submit reports to the Comelec.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Bagid. We will definitely watch out for that resolution. Attorney Reyes also answered for Lente. They have a reform track relating to disinformation. The work is focused on strategies to ensure accurate disclosure of identities. They hope to be able to use this information to be able to monitor online political ads better. Will any member of the panel would like to add to those answers? All right. Let's have a second question from Honorable Mitmug. Will political parties like SEC-registered corporations be allowed to engage in business to raise funds? Will they be covered by BIR? Attorney Bagid answered, as well as Attorney Dia. Attorney Dia, would you like to add more to this?
Yes, this is actually why we need a political party law. You want to define the parameters of how much political parties can, can operate. One important thing, I mean, as I've said, you cannot legislate the Bible or the Quran. You cannot expect good behaviors from politicians, but you have to change and affect or perhaps change the rules of the game and perhaps change the incentives that are available right now. The way it is right now, political parties are not really, much of a factor in electoral success. I mean, to be frank about it, I mean, that's why politicians shift parties like, they're changing their appetite for, what they want to eat every day. They change their costumes every election from red to yellow to green. And that's easy to do because there's not much to becoming or to being identified with political parties except the personalities that are involved. And the main reason for that is that parties are not able to generate the needed resources for political success. And to strengthening therefore the capacity of the parties to perhaps generate the resources to aid their members, apart from, of course, developing and indoctrinating their members on the party ideology, is one thing that can keep members within a party and operate within the ideologies of the of political parties. I think that's that's very commonsensical enough, and that would include fundraising. Other countries allow parties to rent out, to buy buildings, rent out spaces in their buildings, maybe to sell some, gadgets or some maybe paraphernalia to raise funds. But these are regulated by a very strongly capacitated political party commission, or in our case, that's the election commission. No, but we just don't have that. There's a huge policy gap in the way we do things. But Congress have failed to act on this. Perhaps they're, satisfied with what they have right now because they benefit from what we have right now. There is also a need to invest on good politics. And we have always seen politics as an evil. We don't see the value of politics in maintaining democracy. And that's why we look at investing on good politics as a not in a favorable light. But we have to change that view. Politics, good politics is a public good if we want to preserve our democracy.
Thank you, Attorney Gia. Attorney Barro, you were nodding. Would you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I agree with Attorney Louie, and I think those are inspired thoughts. If we, as I said, there's no escaping politics, right? It really affects everything that we do on a daily basis. So if we are not able to invest in what Attorney Louie calls good politics, then someone else will do. Someone else will come and get that space for us. And I'd also like to maybe problematize one of his thoughts about the Congress not being able to pass political party reform bills. And I think he's absolutely correct that because the status quo is being served by the current regime. For example, as I said, the political dynasty law, even with an express constitutional mandate, has yet to pass Congress. And the Dean Ron Mendoza of the Ateneo School of Government and his peers and his colleagues actually already found out and established the link between fat political dynasties and poor development outcomes in particular areas. So there is not only it appears that there is not only a relationship, a correlation, but actually causation between having political dynasties lord over particular places and development outcomes. So why is that happening? Because, well, Congress and many of the levels of our government are still occupied by members of such families. So that would be that's a hard not to crack, because the Constitution actually says Congress should do something, but they're not. So it's a subject of it should be a subject of a very colorful discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Attorney Barber. And I think this is where people's participation will be very important, right? If we are able to muster the support of the public towards policy change, and I guess that's only when our leaders in Congress will see the significance of these reforms. Our third is not exactly a question, but more like a comment. I am for a stronger and proactive Comelec. This is from Arjan Aguirre, sorry. I would like to see a Comelec that is proactive in raising the standards of party politics by making interventions in party building, by offering party education modules for political parties to help standardize or perhaps reach a level of common practice and prioritization among parties. Arjun also says in the comment section that he salutes the panelists for their inputs. This gave him hope about the future of party institutionalization in the Philippines. All right. And then there's one last question that has not been answered yet, addressed to Attorney Bagit. Is the CFO still an ad hoc office until now? And are there any recent prosecutions for overspending? Attorney Bagit.
Sorry, Colin, I was not able. Okay. What was the question again, please?
The question was, is the CFO, Campaign Finance Office, is it still an ad hoc office until now? And are there any recent prosecutions for overspending?
Yeah, except me, no, who is a regular employee, all of my staff are job orders. Actually, my item is in the Region 9, so there really no plantilla position in the campaign finance office. With respect to the prosecution, we have lawyers, no, hired by the commission, contract of service. We prosecute the offender. Both in the preliminary investigations, we file cases there, and if there is a finding of a probable cause and there is an information and filed before the court, we also prosecute, or at least go to the court not to be the witness.
All right. Thank you very much, Attorney Bagin.
Okay.
Okay, so we have no more questions in the Q&A box. But I suppose you have a lot of questions in mind, but yeah, we went.
Florine?
Oh, Attorney Gia, yes, sorry.
Let me just add, no, I think all is not lost. I think if we generate enough demand from the voting public, from which, of course, the politicians owe their mandate, there is a chance to actually, should I say, create a demand, as I thought we did in 2002, when we organized a conference attended by all political parties, opposition, as well as administration at that time. And the consensus was really to make campaign or political party financing more transparent, and to legislate a law that would, make sure that, political parties are able to function as they should. So basically, this is a consensus among politicians. Well, I think the environment then was more, should I say, conducive, but this is something that we can work for. And getting a consent, imagine everyone agreed. I mean, there was no exception at that time. So we thought that the law will be passed, or the bill will be passed, but it didn't happen. There was an event that happened then, and we can discuss that later. But what I'm saying is, if we can have that kind of initiative again, meaning the civil society, and drive the demand for better politics, and I'm sure the politicians will heed, and that is something that we should be doing. And even the creation of the campaign finance office in Comelec was driven by the initiatives that we had. Carol, if you remember that. It was an output from our analysis of the situation that we need better disclosure, a strong capacity of Comelec, stronger capacity of Comelec. That was the result of our monitoring, and it was given. And surprisingly, Comelec was even willing to deputize the coalition. Isn't that right, Carol? To do it, and we said no.
Yes,
That's
sir,
beyond what civil. Yes, that's what civil society cannot do anymore. We have to maintain some distance, and that's why we developed a concept paper that created the campaign finance office. And we were lucky to have Commissioner Lim, as mentioned by Carol, who was so passionate in seeing this through. So that is what happened. The focus on political finance, or on money and politics, was driven by initiative from the civil society. If we can only have the same initiative right now, Carol would call it Perat Politica 2.0, probably that is something that we can still do. But even the institutionalization of the campaign finance office is contained in the political party bill pending in Congress. It calls for a creation of a permanent unit that can be properly resourced, and therefore it can hire the right kind of auditors, people, prosecutors, to do its job well. So this has been a long, there is a long history on civil society advocacy on campaign finance or political finance reform. And I think the civil society just has to, do it again. And perhaps we would hope for, politicians to listen to us. Sorry, I'm just passionate about this medyo, in Tagalog we call, matagal na to eh. There has to be some results already.
Oh, it's okay, Attorney Gia. Thank you. Thank you for putting things in perspective. We must keep the fire burning, right? We've achieved so much, we cannot let go. We must move forward. All right. So in case you need more information or you want to get in touch with our panelists, please coordinate with Lente. They'd be happy to link you with our panelists. They're members of the panel. So we move to close our program, but first, can I please ask our panelists to turn on their cameras for a group photo? I would like to beg your indulgence, please. All right, so is Janica helping us here? Sorry.
Yes, yes, Miss Fleury. Okay. On the count of three, smile, and then we'll take the picture. 1, 2, 3, smile. It's okay now.
Thank you. So to formally close our conference this morning, afternoon already, our next speaker is Lente's Executive Director. She also served as one of ANFREL's electoral analysts in the 2019 Sri Lankan parliamentary elections. Aside from her election work, our speaker teaches philosophy and politics to grade 12 students of Calamba City, Laguna. Colleagues, let me call on Attorney Ona Caritos.
Thank you, Florine. Thank you to all our speakers, our resource persons, for all the wonderful presentations this morning and afternoon. It's already afternoon. Thank you to all our participants who stayed with us until this hour. I know we went to overtime, but it's hard to leave the conference with all these interesting presentations coming from our resource persons. First, let me acknowledge our co-sponsors for this event. We would like to call on Association for Elections and Democracy, PERLUDEM from Indonesia, Bersih 2.0 from Malaysia, of course, Lente from the Philippines, Pradet and Women's Caucus from Timor-Leste, the International Institute for Election and Democracy International, IDEA. We'd like to thank our sponsors, USAID, through the Asia Pacific Regional Support Program for Election and Political Transitions, or USAID RESPECT. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to organize this conference, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to hear wonderful presentations, starting with our keynote speaker, Commissioner Tito Gia, and our resource speakers, Attorney Prime Bagid, Attorney Kaisa Katina T. Reyes, Attorney Patty Miranda, Miss Carol Ilagan, Attorney Third Bago. We've learned a lot from other presentations. And one takeaway that I will get from this morning is that we have there are so many things to do, and we need to focus on those things, and we need to prioritize which reforms we want to zero in, so that the Pera and Politica, which Carol shared to us earlier, would happen or would materialize. So, and I would like to also acknowledge the excellent moderation of our moderator this morning, Ms. Pauline Simon. Thank you for adjusting to all our technical difficulties this morning and this afternoon. Thank you to our co-organizers, Joyce and Heroic, for being with us this morning and for continuously being patient with all of our questions leading to this conference. And thank to all our participants, especially MP Ras Mitmug from the Bangsamoro Transition Authority, for being with us this afternoon. And this is the start of a series of events about political party, about different electoral topics. And on September 24, PERLUDEM will be having their own event. On September 28, Timor-Leste will be holding their own. And October 1, Bersih 2.0 Malaysia will be having their own conference like this. So let's watch out for all those conferences to learn more, not only about the Philippines electoral situation, but from our neighboring countries as well. So again, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Good morning to everyone, and let us all stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attorney Carrito. So this is where it ends. For now, we have a lot to do, right? Thank you again to all our speakers, guests, participants, and others present in the conference. And of course, thank you and congratulations to the Asia Pacific Regional Support Program for Election and Political Transitions, or USAID Respect. Thank you, everyone. See you all in some other platforms.